Coming up on Chasing the Natty, Week 3 of the 2025 college football season is in the books, and while everyone is still recovering from the absolute buffet of great games we got yesterday, we're all here trying to make sure we are able to scoop up the breakouts that'll help you win your college fantasy leagues down the line. As always, we will be discussing those who have been putting up duds recently and how worried you should be about them. Then we'll take a look at some waiver wire players to avoid. And then, of course, we'll get to a brand new set of players to add from the waiver wire. All of that and more coming right after this.
Sellers picks his way to the right and is tripped up, reaching for the end zone. Touchdown. What a start.
Give it to Reed, and there he goes. Nobody's going to catch him. Touchdown.
It's caught. Jeremiah Smith. Touchdown, Ohio State. The legend grows.
This is Chasing the Natty, a college fantasy football podcast. All right, welcome in everyone. This is Jared Palmgren, host of the Chasing the Natty podcast. Hope you guys are having a wonderful ride to your work on this Monday morning. We are the College Fantasy Football Podcast on the Campus of Canton Podcast Network. You can find us in all of your podcast feeds and on YouTube every Monday morning and Tuesday night during the season. That is 6 a.m. Monday mornings and 8 p.m. Tuesday nights. If you want to support the great work we do here, head on over to campusofcanton.com. Subscribe there with any of our phenomenal tiers. We got content ranging on all sorts of college football games, whether it's CFF, Devy, C2C, College IDP, College DFS, Underdog Best Balls. If you play it, then we've got content, whether it's tools, rankings, pretty much everything you need to succeed. In fact, right now, if you want to support the show directly and even further, make sure when you sign up for one of our yearly membership tiers, you use the promo code NATTY, N-A-T-T-Y, to get 10% off your yearly membership. Again, that is promo code NATTY, N-A-T-T-Y. If you can't do that, you can just show us some love by leaving a like, a comment, and a subscribe on the YouTube side of things. Or on the podcast side of things, just leave a 5-star review. Make sure you are following the show. Not only does that show us support, but also the game of college fantasy football in general, a ton of support. If you have any further questions or just want to get in touch for whatever reason, you can find me in the show on Twitter. I am at CFF_Jared. The show is at Chasing the Natty. I don't know about you guys, but like I said in the intro, y'all, I am still trying to recover from just the absolute onslaught of incredible games we had yesterday. This wasn't one of those typical, like, oh, it's a sleepy Saturday, you never know what we're going to get. No, this was just one of those weekends where we identified games that we knew that were going to be good, and then they actually delivered. There was no surprise blowouts or anything. For one, you guys know me, I'm a Georgia Bulldog fan, and boy, that Tennessee game, I mean, you might be able to see it if you're watching on YouTube. Yep, right there, there's a couple white hairs right there. Golly, that game was just absolutely nuts for me. But then, like, if you're an Arkansas or Ole Miss fan, that game was nuts. Texas A&M, Notre Dame fans, good Lord, I bet your hearts are still pumping from yesterday. Just overall a great Saturday. But you guys know what we're here to do. If you want the recaps and everything, you can go watch your Bud Elliott's, you can go watch your Josh Pates. They all do a fantastic job. But we are the only long form show here that is going to provide you exactly what you need to win your waiver wire this week for your college fantasy league. So I say we hop right onto it. As always, this is a pretty long show, so we got plenty to discuss. As you guys always know, again, the show is broken up into 3 segments here. We'll discuss the freakout scale. Here we got 4 players that we will be discussing here today. 4 new players. Again, sometimes we repeat players if there's like a big jump in our feelings about a certain player, but a lot of the players we discussed last week were roughly at the same point after this past week. So we got 4 brand new players to look at here. Then we will discuss the waiver wire traps. Again, these are 5 players that I look at on the waiver wire, usually guys that performed extremely well this past week. And some people might be tempted to pick up off the waiver wire, and I am here to tell you, no, don't do that. And then, of course, we'll get into our actual waiver wire predictions there, or waiver wire pickups there. So, yeah, enough rambling for me. Let's get on right into it. Let's start talking about these freak out players. The first two we have up on the screen here is quarterback Garrett Nussmeier out of LSU and Mr. Eric Singleton out of TCU. Two guys that have definitely underperformed compared to people's expectations so far this season. Nussmeier is a little bit worse, I would say, mostly due to the fact that, again, you're talking about a guy that's had 3 chances now to really kind of show that this LSU offense is for real and that, you know, he can reach that high ceiling potential that we've been talking about. And instead, we have gotten 13 fantasy points, 10.8 fantasy points, and 13.3 fantasy points. Just remarkably consistent production, honestly, from him, right? Because he's had passing yardages of 232, 237, and 220. Has had a singular passing touchdown in each one of his games. Just nowhere close to this offense that we were kind of expecting from last year, which is kind of crazy because they brought back some pretty key pieces, right? I mean, they bring back Caden Durham. They bring back, obviously, Garrett Nussmeier, the person we're talking about here. But then, you know, at receiver, Aaron Anderson is back. Chris Hilton came back, but he hasn't done anything this year. But, you know, Xavier Thomas is back for another year. They bring in Nick Anderson. They bring in Barry Brown. You would think all the pieces were there for this offense to take a real big step. And it just hasn't happened. Now, I know there's some replacements along the offensive line. But, again, from what I was kind of told, it seemed like that some of those would be a little bit of addition by subtraction. Has not clearly happened at all. This offense has just been stuttering and sputtering so far. I mean, you're talking about averaging 20 points a game, which is really crazy for the potential of this LSU offense. Again, against Clemson, you're willing to forgive them, 17 points. Clemson's a real good defense. That was not a surprise that turned into a defensive performance. The real red flag was them only scoring 23 points versus Louisiana Tech. But as we've seen, a lot of teams this year, especially against lower competition, you have kind of that dud game. You're trying to get out of there as quickly as possible. It's lower scoring than you'd expect. But again, this is 3 games in a row. So where are we all at? Again, for those that haven't seen this before, it is me, Nate Marquise, and Chris K all give a rating 1 to 10. 1 being start with confidence, 10 being drop that fool with, some stuff in the middle. 5, you're looking for a backup plan. 8's like bench him now, stuff like that, right? We're in the 7-8 range. Like, I think, again, who does LSU plays? I sorry, y'all. I could have completely forgot to look up who LSU plays this weekend. Because my thought process on this is like, if you find the right, they play Southeast Louisiana this week. You could convince me that that's an all right start for him. For this week, even though, they didn't do extremely well versus Louisiana Tech, like that's FCS competition. And given the narrative around LSU's offense right now, it wouldn't shock me if they try to go more aggressive there. Get Nussmeier, 3 to 4 touchdowns on the day. Just kind of turn this narrative around a little bit. But otherwise, against SEC competition, you can't start him until he shows that, this offense can improve. And that's pretty much what Kay and Nate are saying here as well. Like, it's the big thing is that just this entire offense isn't really working out. It's not like Caden Durham has been sucking up all the touchdowns. Caleb Jackson's been sucking up all the touchdowns or anything. And something that Kay really points out is that without this offense being, fully clicking here, Nussmeier doesn't have the rushing ability to kind of add and pad his fantasy points every single week. He is completely dependent on this passing game, and it just isn't there right now. And so, we're all definitely worried about Garrett Nussmeier. He is 100% somebody that we are sitting in most scenarios, unless, again, you really do believe in the fact that he can score 3 to 4 touchdowns this weekend. The next one here is the big one, and that is Eric McAllister out of TCU, the most highly requested player to be discussed this week for the freakout scale. Again, for those that don't know, I reach out to the NIL tier over at our Campus of Canton Discord, and they help me out every week, kind of narrow down who we discuss on this show, making sure I'm not, discussing players that most people aren't actually that freaked out about. But Eric McAllister was the dude that I had at the highest priority for this show. And again, no shock at all. That's who was the most requested. But It's weird because all three of me, Nate, and Kay have a pretty wide variety of opinions here, right? Nate has a very simple but poignant thought when it comes to this. Dude has sucked 2 weeks in a row. We've only gotten 2 games out of him. He sucked in the 2 games that he's played. You can't play him if he sucked two weeks in a row. There's too many other good options. I totally think that's fair. Nate's got this at an 8. Kay, on the other hand, is the other extreme. Kay's looking at the matchups, and this is kind of where I'm looking as well. You got 2 blowouts in a row, and Kay's kind of thinking that McAllister's going to be fine once we get into conference play. Once there's a bit more even competition with TCU and the guys they're playing against, they'll rely on McAllister just a little bit more there. And, that's kind of where I'm at as well, but I'm kind of in the middle here. I got a 5. I do think, again, especially with how many great wide receivers are on the waiver wire right now, look for a backup plan. Make it, if you got Eric McAllister, go and grab 2 waiver wires, wide receivers off the wire this week. Right, just start making a backup plan, just in case this really does go south from here. But also, I'm kind of in the same camp as Kay, where I look at these 2 matchups, and it's 2 weird matchups, right? You got the first game against UNC, which you might think is like, oh, that's even competition. That should be pretty indicative of what we should be seeing down the line. And, he finished that game 5 targets, 3 catches, 20 yards. He got 2 of the first 3 targets of the game. And it became abundantly clear very early on that UNC's entire defensive game plan, at least to start that game, was, hey, shut down McAllister and let's force them to find somebody else. Well, guess what? They did. TCU did. They found Dwyer. They found Manjack. They found other options in that receiving room. And, UNC's gamble did not pay off there at all. Then we have, them facing Abilene Christian this past week. FCS games are such a crapshoot for CFF so often because, again, you could have just absolutely monster games from your stars where, in the right circumstances, you could have an Elijah Surratt going off for 150 plus yards and 3 touchdowns, or you can have what Elijah Surratt did the very next week against the Cupcake competition, have 30 yards and nothing, right? It's such a crapshoot. So it's like, is that what we're seeing here with Eric McAllister, or is there more reason to be worried? I, again, lean towards I'm not that worried. Again, great waiver wire options out there. Go pick up some wide receivers just in case. But when you kind of break it down, right, 1, still second on the team in targets so far, right? 9 targets compared to Jordan Dwyer. Jordan Dwyer having 17 targets so far is pretty great. But here's the thing, like, McAllister is out there on the field with Dwyer, right? He is number 1 on the team when it comes to these pass catching snaps. So it's not like this is a guy that's getting rotated a lot or anything like that. He is one of their main options out there. They constantly keep him out there on the field. Meanwhile, it's guys like Manjack, who's rotating with guys like Ed Small and Jordan Bailey and guys like that, right? So I think as long as McAllister keeps those snaps, on the upper end for this team, or not even just the upper end, but, is just one of the number 1, number 2 guys out there in terms of snaps. Like, I kind of agree with Kay that this is going to even itself out. And we have guys like, I think we have to be careful, right? Because we've only gotten 2 games out of TCU. And, it's 2 games that, you wish you would have seen much more out of McAllister, obviously. But every wide receiver, even the best ones, have dud games every single year. Is this just a scenario where his 2 dud games come in his first 2 games and then he's great the rest of the season? I think there's a legit possibility of that, right? It's like, would you be freaking out over this if he had these exact games in weeks, 4 and 8 rather than weeks 1 and 2, right? Again, I get it. You'd rather have seen something up until this point, right? But I'm in the camp where, again, go grab a wide receiver if you're really that worried about it, but I'm not fully out on Eric McAllister yet at all. So let's move on to our other 2 freakout scale candidates of the week. We got Dylan Carson, running back out of Air Force, and then we got James Peoples out of Ohio State. We will start with Carson here, and this one hurts my soul because it feels like, oops, I did it again. I fell for Calhoun, who sucks as a coach because he, once again, is doing the same crap he's done the last couple of years where, again, we know this Air Force offense does its best work when it has a super back that it can give 30 carries to a game or 20 plus carries to a game. And Dylan Carson, for 2 years in a row, finished the season as that guy. And we all sat here and thought, okay, let's just continue on from there. And then we get into the season, and Air Force and Calhoun are once again like overthinking this to high end. And Carson's now stuck here with, 11 rushing attempts in week 1 against Bucknell. Again, I was kind of willing to forgive him a little bit, being like, again, FCS competition. Maybe we don't need to, run Dylan Carson that much in that scenario. But then we get to week 2 against Utah State, a conference opponent, and Carson gets 8 carries for 53 yards. It's not even like Carson's not performing well, right? It's not like Carson's running for 2.5 yards a carry here. He's running for, 6.5 yards a carry last week. Again, you're playing from behind a little bit. Utah State did put up, 49 points up on Utah State. But at the same time, like, it is just maddening that we just can't get what we know works for what we know works for Air Force, and we're stuck here with, Owen Allen getting 18 carries so far, Dylan Carson having 17 carries so far, Cade Harris having 16 carries so far, Josh Johnson, quarterback, but still 14 carries there. Liam Sarka, yes, sorry, completely almost messed that up, but it's like this full committee approach just hasn't worked for Air Force at all the last couple of seasons. And they keep insisting on doing it. It drives me nuts. But yeah, because they're pulling this crap again, all of us are very worried about this. Like, Hayes got it at a 6. I got it at a 7. Nate's got it at an 8. I'm willing to give Air Force like one more chance here. So that's why I'm not a full 8. That's why I'm not fully sitting Carson here. But like, I think you only do so in an emergency. In any league that I have Carson, I'm taking a heavy look at my bench options or even guys on the waiver wire and seeing if I'm willing to start them over Carson this week, because again, you can't trust anything you see out of Air Force right now, and it's extremely, extremely frustrating. And again, I just feel dumb because I fell for this 2 years in a row, and again, it feels like they're just making this more complicated than it needs to be over at Air Force. Meanwhile, our last freakout scale candidate for this week is James Peoples, the running back out of Ohio State. And yeah, 5-alarm fire here. Kay's got it at an 8. Nate and I are at a 9 on this. It's bad news bears for James Peoples stands, right? We already kind of talked about before the season started that it felt weird going after Ohio State running backs this year because Judkins and Trayvon Henderson didn't work for college fantasy last year, despite being more talented options than, Peoples and Donaldson, at least as a duo together, right? And yet we were still kind of going after Peoples and Donaldson this year as if it was going to be something that worked out even better this year. And so far, it's not only just not worked out the same, it's worked out worse, right? Neither Donaldson nor Peoples has really had the kind of performance that you want to see. Like Donaldson maybe has a better chance, but Peoples definitely not in a spot where you can feel comfortable holding on to him in a college fantasy sense, at least in terms of like redraft. Dynasty, yeah, keep him and stuff like that. C2C, keep him. But again, we're mostly here talking about college fantasy or redraft, and it's just a mess there in that Ohio State backfield. And as Kay points out in his reasoning, like the offense right now for Ohio State is at its best when it's throwing, and they're not really running the ball all that much. And when they're not running the ball all that much, it's a committee situation. Why would you even hold on to the RB2, which Kay points out that's what Peoples is here. So again, yeah, Nate's very much a 9. He's like bench or cut, either is fine with him. It's just a massive running back by committee. We don't see this improving at all unless God forbid something happens to Donaldson. So yeah, Peoples very close to as close to a must drop as you can right now. So that being said, let's move on. Let's discuss the waiver wire traps for this week after I take a sip of water here. And so This is the first week where, again, it starts, the waiver wire traps segment's always fun the first couple of weeks. It's so easy to just point out, like, oh, they played FCS competition and everything. But as we kind of get a little bit further in it, you start not to be able to do that as much. But I say that and I look at the graphic and I realize, like, well, most of the guys I'm talking about here today are still facing some FCS opponents. But we'll start with Connor Harrell here. And this one breaks my heart because I like Connor Harrell so much during the offseason. But boy, things are not going to get turned around in year one for Tim Albin and Charlotte. I think that, there's just too many pieces missing. I really do think them losing Don Chaney Jr. right before fall camp and everything. I think they were going to be heavily reliant on Chaney Jr. for this season to keep this offense going, and it's just not been the same. They're trying to use CJ Stokes. Rod Gainey Jr.'s somebody they're trying to go right now, but there's just no run game. But, this past week against, an FCS opponent here, Connor Harrell, 382 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, ran the ball 13 times for 47 yards, 2 touchdowns on the ground. Just a phenomenal performance. But this feels as waiver wire trap as possible, right? The only reason why this offense really got going is, again, we're facing an FCS opponent. 2, their defense is so bad that the FCS opponent was scoring on them and forcing them to score as well. So it was like, it not only were they scoring, they were in a shootout that forced them to score here, and that's just not something I am going to be relying on at all down the stretch. I mean, we saw Charlotte get absolutely destroyed in week 1 by App State. I feel like that's the same thing we're going to see them get done to a lot as they get into American play whole bunch here. I would love it if Harrell and this offense turned around, this early on in the season, but I just highly, highly doubt it, especially before their first bye or their 2 bye weeks here. So I'm not telling people to go after Harrell after this past week. Probably the most controversial guy I have on the waiver wire traps list this week is Steve Angeli, quarterback out of Syracuse. He faced Colgate this past week, and great performance. 32 pass attempts, 417 yards, 5 touchdowns. Also ran the ball 6 times for 21 yards and a touchdown. And a lot of people are probably having flashbacks to Kyle McCord last year. And, they're like, oh, Syracuse is starting to figure out their offense. Let's do this, guys. They played toothpaste this past week. Let's calm down just a little bit. In addition, Yassine Willis was out for this game, so they were playing the offensive coordinator's son at running back. Not that Will Nixon isn't like a terrible running back, but still, like, they had no other choice but to really throw this ball around, maybe get some confidence in Angeli. I'm sure that this is the kind of thing that boosts Angeli to perform a little bit better than he has the last couple of weeks. But let's look at the last couple of weeks, right? Against Tennessee, 40 passing attempts, 23 completions, 274 yards, and a touchdown. Negative rushing yards. The week after, 53 pass attempts. Against UConn, by the way. 33 completions, 417 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a massive comeback effort. He was stinking most of the game. Still finished with negative rushing yards in that game. And again, it took them playing an FCS opponent for this offense to look hyper legitimate again. I don't trust it. I think this is fool's gold. I think that Angeli, he's a safer option at quarterback than probably Ricky Collins was going to end up being, but a Kyle McCord, he is not. Kyle McCord and that whole situation last year was just such a perfect storm for that offense. And yes, we are getting, the volume we're seeking here, right? Because, 53 pass attempts versus UConn, 40 versus Tennessee. Problem is the efficiency is just not there at all. We're talking 6.8 yards per attempt against Tennessee, 7.9 versus UConn there. That's just nothing that's you're excited to write home about. And again, you add in the negative yardage to just take away from the fantasy totals there. I'm not buying into the Angeli resurgence here. Do this against a couple of ACC teams and I will buy back in. Let's move on to a couple of running backs that are a bit of fool's gold here. Harrison Whaley, running back out of Virginia. God almighty. Tony Elliott, you drive every one of us nuts in the fantasy community, but at the same time, you were facing William and Mary this past week, so it's not unheard of for even if you do have a workhorse back to split the backfield a whole lot more than you normally do. So if you're worried about, Jamari Taylor, you picked him up this past week and you're like, oh my God, he stunk it up this week. I wouldn't worry too much. Let's see how he does in a couple of ACC games here. before we start freaking out about him. But Harrison Whaley, man, again, great performance. 10 rush attempts, 151 yards, and 3 touchdowns, including a long rush of 97 yards. Yeah, that's basically the gist here, right? I'm not trusting Harrison Whaley, a guy that's been injured to hell and back, one, but two, to consistently rip off 15 yards a rush, score 3 touchdowns on 10 attempts here in a room that at best he would be a solid piece of a committee, if not the clear number 2 back behind Jamari Taylor moving forward. Yeah, don't buy into Whaley's performance this past weekend. There's no resurgence for him here. I would move on. The other guy at running back that I want to discuss here is Damon Bankston, another guy with a phenomenal performance, especially playing up against competition here. Bankston had a great performance against UCLA here. 15 rush attempts, 154 yards, and a touchdown on the ground. He also had 3 receptions for 49 yards and a touchdown through the air. Again, great job. And again, UCLA's terrible, but it's still very impressive for any G5 opponent to go up against a Power 4 team and just do what Bankston was able to do. The problem is so much of that came because Scottrey Humphrey went down this game. And for what it sounds like, what knocked Humphrey out of this game wasn't something super serious. Again, it was hard to find information, admittedly, but the little information that I did find did indicate that Humphrey was at least warming up to come back into the game towards the end of the game. But again, when you're up, 25 points as a huge underdog here, why put your best player out there and risk re-injuring anything? So, reading between the lines, it seems like this won't be a long-term deal for Humphreys. And if that's the case, if Humphreys comes back, we go back to what we saw with Bankston before, right? 6 rush attempts, 28 yards, and a touchdown versus Idaho State. You also had 4 attempts for 18 yards versus Michigan. Granted, that's against Michigan. But regardless of anything else, right? It'll throw Bankston back to being RB2 for New Mexico. Again, we're still not entirely sure exactly how good New Mexico is. Again, we actually haven't seen them play a conference opponent yet, so it's hard to tell exactly how they're going to perform against Mountain West competition, and if they perform better against, or if they perform worse against Mountain West competition. Good Lord, no wonder Deshaun Foster just got fired. But yeah, that's basically the gist on Bankston. Don't go picking him up off the waiver wire. Maybe if you had Scottrey Humphrey and you just want to grab Bankston, and if Humphrey's confirmed out this next week, you throw him out there, I can understand that. But in terms of just your regular college fantasy player looking to grab running backs off the waiver wire, I would not just go after Bankston. And then last but not least, we got to discuss Omar Cooper, the number one scorer in all of fantasy this past week. Just phenomenal performance against Indiana State here. 10 targets, 10 receptions, 270 yards, 4 touchdowns. It is hard, and I mean hard, to ask for a more complete game from a receiver. He did phenomenal. Nothing to take away from him here, but I'm going to take away a little bit from him here, at least in terms of a college fantasy option. Abundantly clear that Elijah Surratt is still your number one guy here for Indiana, even though, again, he's had 2 semi-dud games. He out targets Cooper by about 7 targets to this point, and that's with Cooper getting 10 whole targets, a career high into this game. Again, I just don't know about you guys. Cooper, for this Indiana offense, is great, but he's always been a deep threat specialist. He's extremely good for best ball formats and stuff like that. So if you're in a league that does best ball scoring, but you can pick up waivers and stuff like that, I'm fine with you picking him up there. But in terms of a week-to-week starter, let's take a look at what he's done over the last couple of years, right? He looked great against Kennesaw State. 1 target, 40 yards, and then a 75-yard touchdown on the ground. Hyper efficient, can't rely on that whatsoever. This past week, again, it's Indiana State, right? 10 receptions, 270 yards, 4 touchdowns, 20 yards a catch. He's deep threat specialist, but you're not gonna be able to do that in the Big Ten. And then you go back to the year before. His high in fantasy performance last year came in week 2 against another FCS opponent, right? 4 catches, 131 yards and a touchdown. And then his best Big Ten game came against Maryland in September of last year, 16.3 fantasy points, right? maybe he can beat that one or two times down the stretch, right? Because again, Indiana is going to need him at times, especially if Surratt's getting double covered, but not at all a week-to-week starter, unless you just really, really like 8 to 10 fantasy points every single week. So yeah, Cooper looked great last week. I wouldn't pick him up off the waiver wire this week. So maybe that's a hot take to some, but I'm not going there. All right, another sip of water. Let's get to the part you guys really, really want to hear about, and that's who you actually should be picking up off the waiver wire. And before we get there, again, I'll just kind of go over just my general thoughts on the waiver wire this week. Like, start with quarterback. Like, as I've mentioned previous week, the quarterback market to me currently is kind of the shallowest in CFF due to so many CFF-friendly systems and teams returning their starters and therefore being very draftable before the season. And, that left very few to be picked up afterwards off the waiver wire. However, we do have a few who are starting to show they are beyond a flashy early game or two and could end up being more consistent weekly options than expected. And then the other thing that really kind of stood out to me is that, what CFF players need to be on the lookout right now is for some of these quarterbacks who are being dropped out of frustration really early on because they had a rough early season performance, especially G5 quarterbacks playing against, Power 4 competition. People start them for whatever reason, or they see them on the bench just not putting up points, and they say, screw it, I'll drop them. There are some good G5 quarterbacks that are starting to become more available. We'll have one of those today we'll discuss. And I think that could prove to be a pretty big shifter in some leagues in terms of the power of certain teams. So if you're struggling at quarterback, definitely something to be looking out for. All that being said, we only have 3 quarterbacks today that we're going to do a deep dive. Usually I try to get to 5, but I'm telling you guys, like right now, there's just most of the good quarterbacks are already taken. And then at running back, we have 3 major systems have some new names emerging here that, different than the guys that we expected to start in the preseason. Some due to injury, other because of performance. I think all 3 of these guys could end up being real season savers at the position for teams lucky enough to grab them off the waiver wire. And then, as it has been the last couple of weeks, wide receiver, I think, continues to be the most fruitful market for those who have been struggling at that position. And so, yeah, that's kind of just a general overview, the kind of preview before we get into it. And just a reminder, everybody, every player we discuss in depth today will be rostered on 30% or less according to FanTrack. So I try to grab guys that are available in most leagues. So if I discuss a guy that is already taken in your league, sorry, but not sorry. I can only do so much. Let's start with quarterbacks here, and let's start with a quarterback that surprised me so far. One of the beautiful things about college fantasy is watching guys that we've really long since given up on somehow find their way back into relevance. And so far this year, if there's a face to that kind of archetype, it has been Taquan Roberson. For those that don't know, Roberson is the quarterback out of Buffalo this year. He is entering his 6th year of college play after spending 2 years at Penn State, 2 years at UConn, 1 as a backup and 1 as the starter for them, 1 year as a backup for Kansas State, and then now he is the starter, like I said, for the Buffalo Bills. Or Buffalo Bulls, not the Buffalo Bills. Very different teams. And during those 5 years prior to this season, Roberson only got that 1 year of extensive playing time. Like I said, that was his 2nd year at UConn where he was the starter. And he really just wasn't impressive by any means there. He threw for 6.1 yards per attempt, not a good passer at all at the time. And you were kind of hoping that he might be able to make it up with his legs. But he only had 120 yards on the ground the full season. And so then when he transferred to Kansas State, became the clear backup over there, it really kind of looked like Roberson had kind of waved the white flag on his career, said, screw it. I'm just going to become the backup somewhere, get a decent paycheck to hold a clipboard and just call it a career. But then he stuck around for another year and he's transferred to Buffalo. And, very few, admittedly, in the offseason saw that transfer and really felt optimistic about it, right? Buffalo hasn't really been a huge spot for CFF quarterbacks over the last couple of years, although Ogbonna was pretty solid down the stretch last year. But speaking of Ogbonna, most saw Roberson as a pretty straight downgrade to Ogbonna. Ogbonna ran out of eligibility after last season, so Roberson had a very wide open job here to take. And so what's happened since, right? The opener against Minnesota wasn't inspiring, but, that's pretty understandable for a MAC squad. But the last 2 games against Kent State and St. Francis have really shown glimpses of a potential great play at quarterback once Buffalo's fully into their MAC schedule. Like, over the last 2 games, Roberson has averaged just over 30 fantasy points and 3 touchdowns per game, doing his work both on the ground and through the air, right? And what's especially exciting is his legs, right? When he's not facing a Big Ten defense, he has had rushing yardage totals of 88 and 63 yards on the ground. And that provides a very, very nice fantasy floor each week. And also, it seems like Roberson's starting to really connect with his top 2 wide receivers there with Victor Snow and Nick McMillan, something that we didn't really get to see with Ogbonna last year, right? Roberson only averaged 120 yards passing in his first 2 games, but this last performance, we saw him put up 318 yards through the air on Kent State. That's a career high for him. That's nice to see. And I can already hear some of you guys saying, Kent State, St. Francis, like, those aren't defenses to write home about, and I agree, but also no defense that Buffalo will be facing from here on out besides Miami of Ohio in Week 13 is worth doing so, right? Like, is worth writing home about. Like, he'll have great matchups in pretty much every single week from here on out. I'd absolutely grab Roberson if I was a team struggling at quarterback. I'd roll the dice on this and really hope that he starts taking off here as he starts playing a ton of G5 opponents. And I think he could absolutely be a season saver down the line if, like I said, if he does produce in that conference play like we think he should. So, Roberson, like him quite a bit. His next 3 opponents, Troy, UConn, Eastern Michigan. I think all of those are very startable. So, let's move on to the next guy here, a guy that I somewhat alluded to at the beginning, but really the archetype is what I alluded to. And something I'm keeping an eye on this season is, like I said, these quarterbacks that are being dropped early on because of rough performances in these first couple of weeks. So many good quarterbacks are already on rosters going into the season because, like I said, so much was known ahead of time. However, I do think that because of that, we are seeing some shorter leashes for quarterbacks this year with regards to fantasy owners than we've had seen in the past, right? People are being quick to drop a quarterback for new waiver wire options, knowing that if that doesn't work out, there's still good options on the waiver wire. And I think this is leading to quarterbacks, good quarterbacks getting back into the market. And case in point is quarterback out of Arkansas State, Jalen Raynor. Jalen Raynor's rostership percentage dropped a whopping 5% in 1 week after playing Arkansas, where he only put up 12.8 fantasy points. And I have to ask, to the managers out there who made that decision after that performance, I have to ask, what did you expect to happen in that game? Like, we're talking about a G5 quarterback playing up against Power 4 competition. Those kind of performances happen all the time. So, like, why was that the deal breaker, right? And it's not like Raynor had a bad performance the week before. He put up 27.5 fantasy points against Southeast Missouri, right? Like, again, it's an FCS opponent, but I'd get the drop a little bit more if we started off with 2 duds in a row, and one of those was against an FCS competition, right? But now, Raynor not only, let me try this again. Now, Raynor bounced back and responded with 23.2 fantasy points this past week, right? Well, that's not a crazy score. He did it up against Iowa State, right? Like, again, we just saw him struggling against Arkansas's defense the past week. Then he turns it around and performs really well against a Power 4 defense here, and a solid one, in my opinion, in Iowa State, right? Like, I consider that a huge win. And then it gets even better when you start to dive into the stats, especially his rushing. Like, we've seen Raynor run a lot over the last couple of weeks. He's averaged 12 non-sack rushing attempts in his last 2 games. So they are letting him run a lot more this year than really they have done in the past. And to me, part of it is having to do with Raynor playing hero ball from behind against tougher competition, but I also think there's some other factors at play. One, like, a lot of us still kind of have this image of Raynor as the, whippersnapper, surprise true freshman, highly athletic guy being put out there by Arkansas State with the high upside and everything. He's not that anymore. He's not really a whippersnapper at quarterback anymore. He's entering his 3rd year with the Red Wolves and is now a veteran presence on this offense. Like, I think we're finally kind of getting to the point where this coaching staff is willing to trust Raynor a bit more, and especially to take that next step. Like, in addition to that, there was also a really under-the-radar injury in week 1, and that was Jacquez Cross, who is expected to be the Red Wolves' lead back this season. And while Cross was always going to be part of like a lead committee, I'm not going to say like he was going to be like some workhorse for them or anything. I do think that losing Cross has changed the way this coaching staff is thinking about this run game a little bit, right? Like I said, Cross was always going to lead a committee, but losing Cross meant losing a ton of veteran stability in that run game. Like, their other two options are Kenyon Clay, a first-year transfer for this program, and then I can't remember the other guy's name off the top of my head, but he is a second-year player for Arkansas State, right? Like, versus Cross has been there for, I think this is his fifth year in college, fourth year with Arkansas State. So a very big veteran of the program, and the assistant, Devin Spencer. Devin Spencer's the young guy that they're running out there at running back as well. Performing well, don't get me wrong, but, again, Cross knows the system backwards and forwards, and I think because of that, they're willing to let Raynor run just a little bit more because they don't have Cross to rely on nearly as much. So like I said, that'll continue to open up some opportunities for Raynor to run more than he has in the past. And against the Sun Belt schedule, I think that could lead to some huge weeks, especially if they get into shootouts of any kind. I think you just need to be hopeful that Raynor has finally kind of cleaned up his interception problem, right? He's thrown 3 interceptions against Power 4 competition so far. You're just kind of hoping that's the competition level and not his habits continuing, because otherwise, if he keeps making turnovers, it's going to force his staff to become conservative with him again, and nobody really wants that. Let's move on to my final quarterback of this week, and it's the second quarterback today that I'm discussing where many, including I, did not see this level of success coming from him into this system, and that is Joey Aguilar, quarterback out of Tennessee. Granted, Josh Heupel's system is designed to be pretty simple to pick up, but, Joey Aguilar has looked great through 3 weeks, right? He is very much showing that he is a veteran quarterback in college. And, you put him in a simple system where you're not asking him to make complicated reads or anything. He has the skills, he has the experience to pull it off pretty dang well, right? He started off with 5 touchdowns in 2 games to start the season. And, Tennessee's offense as a whole looked really good in those non-conference games. However, a lot of us, we had seen that song and dance before from the Vols, right? Only for them to kind of shrivel up once they get into conference play, especially the last couple of years. But if the Vols' performance this past weekend against Georgia was any indication, their offense should see some much better execution this year, and then make them a far more viable play when it comes to CFF opponents down the stretch, right? Like, everyone on Saturday, not wearing Tennessee orange, obviously, had their mouths just gaping wide open. I'm pretty sure even Tennessee fans had their mouths just hanging open a little bit as Aguilar and, his receivers just completely diced up Georgia's defense, scoring 3 touchdowns in just the first quarter of play. Like, Aguilar would go on to have 371 yards through the air, 5 total touchdowns in this game. That's by far the best offensive performance we've seen a Tennessee quarterback perform against a Georgia defense under Josh Heupel. And that list includes the likes of Hendon Hooker, Joe Milken, and Nico Iamaleava, right? Even in a loss, I think this is the kind of performance that can really boost confidence the rest of the season for the Vols, right? And what makes it even better is that among SEC teams, like, Tennessee drew a pretty favorable schedule. Like, in terms of ranked opponents, they still have Alabama, they still got Oklahoma, they got Vandy on the schedule. That'll be a fun one if that's a ranked v ranked matchup at the end of the year. But then the rest of their matchups, you get Mississippi State, Arkansas, Kentucky, Florida. Like, it's hard to picture a more favorable conference matchup for the Vols when you got four of your conference matchups are probably 4 of the worst teams in the conference. Like, I wouldn't be surprised at all if the Vols springboard from this performance, even though it was a loss, and then go on a huge offensive run, at least over the next 3 weeks. Again, they got UAB, they got Mississippi State, they got Arkansas. And then if they're successful against Alabama, boy, oh boy, watch out. Like, Tennessee's offense could be absolutely incredible and back to what we've been wanting to see from them over the last couple of years. So, Aguilar, I'm sorry, man. I doubted you before the season. you showed up my dogs this past weekend, and I'm here to say you're a legitimate play for CFF. So, couple of honorable mentions at quarterback again, guys that I've discussed before here. Jake Retzlaff, great performance against Duke this past weekend. 245 yards passing, 4 touchdowns, and over 100 yards on the ground. That is 200-yard rushing performances from Retzlaff. Any quarterback that can have that upside week to week is a must-own in CFF. Retzlaff should be 100% by the end of the week. Nick Minicucci out of Delaware, once again putting up a mighty fine performance here. 34.6 fantasy points against UConn. That tells me that Delaware should be fine against most of their G5 competition. They're playing again in the CUSA there, so I think he's a great play. Bishop Davenport, a solid performance this past week against Auburn. Much better than I was expecting them to really do there, so I think he'll be fine in Sun Belt play. Should be fun. Anthony Calandria, once again, out of UNLV. 3 20-plus point performances in a row, 26-plus performances in a row from Calandria. He should be picked up in more leagues. And then Darian Mensah, even in a loss for Duke this past weekend, another 300-yard performance, another 3-touchdown game. Just, like I said, an absolute must-add in 6-point passing touchdown leagues is Mensah. All right, let's move on to running backs here. And the first one we got up here is Mr. Ty Edwards, the running back out of West Virginia. It really sucked to see Jaheim White go out for the season. And again, that just goes without saying. But for me in particular, I had him so many best ball leagues. And boy, it has left those teams adrift right now. But when White went down last week, right, in the wake of the announcement that he was done for the year, I had people asking me, like, who's up next for the Mountaineers, right? Some people were kind of speculating some younger players like Clay Ash or Sincere Brown would be up next. The return of Dior Hubbard was kind of discussed. He's been out, but he was supposedly getting ready to come back. I left the door open really to the idea that because in the aftermath of White's injury in their game, there wasn't a clear next man up in that game, that West Virginia could just be going committee the rest of the year. Obviously the worst outcome, but I legitimately thought that could have been a possibility because we'd seen Rich Rod, when he didn't have his main guy, go to a committee approach. However, Ty Edwards comes back, right? An old CFF preseason hype man favorite from a few offseasons ago. Recently got the NCAA to approve his waiver to play one last season here, right before the season start. And based on his performance in the backyard brawl this past weekend, he will make the most of that year, and for West Virginia, it could not have come a moment sooner. After not getting a touch in the first 2 games, Edwards was the catalyst for not only the Mountaineers' win over Pittsburgh, but just for their offense in general. Like, Edwards was a bruising force in this game. Working exclusively on the ground, he ran for 141 yards and 3 touchdowns on 25 carries, just picking right up where Jaheim White left off. That's 5.6 yards per carry, and extremely impressive for a guy who's never played at the Power 4 level before. Obviously, this is a big deal for CFF because based on this game, it seems like we have our Jaheim White replacement, and given what we've seen Rich Rodriguez do even just last year with Trey Stewart, the upside of being a workhorse back in this system is absolutely nuts. If you're somebody who has struggled getting a running back right this year, the CFF gods have sent a mighty gift here with Edwards. I don't love his upcoming date with Utah, but otherwise, like, he should be very playable in most Big 12 matchups. Again, this is a gift from the CFF gods here. I think he should be one of the main priorities off the waiver wire this week. Another guy who is really, I think this is probably your last chance to get him off the waiver wire because, I think there's a lot of hesitancy with him so far to this point, but I think that hesitancy is quickly evaporating here. Sutton Smith, running back out of Memphis, rostered on 26% of leagues here. I can give you the names. Blake Watson, Mario Anderson, guys who have just been absolute league winners the last couple of years in college fantasy. The question now is Sutton Smith on his way to ascending to that level, or is his rise the last couple of weeks merely a mirage that will come crashing down at any moment? I'm willing to think he sticks. This offseason with this Memphis running back room was very interesting when it came to discussing it. Greg DeRosier was was the main name people were discussing, the main name that I was really looking out for. Sutton Smith was considered a huge gamble because of his late season injury, a guy you'd have to draft later on in drafts. And then there's also people discussing, Bodeford and Frank Peasant. People were saying you should take shots on those guys late in drafts because they have a shot to be the number one guy. And then as the season got closer and closer, it really seemed like the answer was going to be the one we all dreaded, and that is that the Memphis Tigers were legitimately going to go committee with their approach at the running back position. But then Greg DeRosier got injured, and then from there, we started to see Sutton Smith, as he kind of returned from injury, slowly see his workload increase as the weeks goes on. He started with 10 touches in week 1, he had 15 in week 2, now 20 this past week versus Troy. And that's not quite the elite volume that, Watson and Anderson had, but it's as close to a bell cow back as you can reasonably expect in college these days. And who knows, maybe next week we see him get 25 touches, right? But as of right now, Smith looks like he is next for the Tigers. The big concern is what happens when, DeRosier returns. Well, I do think that he will impact the volume somewhat of Smith, but when you go back and listen to the coaching comments during the offseason and beat reporter comments, it was pretty clear that everybody there was counting on Sutton coming back healthy and being a big part of this offense this year. And so I think if there's a back to bet on with the Tigers right now, you got to go take your chance on Sutton. Again, if you're struggling at running back, you can't afford not to take this chance if he's available in your league. So I like Sutton Smith a lot as a play this week. He does have a pretty rough date here with Arkansas coming to town, but Arkansas's defense, has never been the cream of the crop for the SEC, so maybe Memphis can fare better than Arkansas State did against them. So, third running back I want to discuss here is Seth McGowan, running back at Kentucky, rostered on 19% of leagues. I mentioned him as a honorable mention last week, but all he did was go and produce again, and so now I'm making him an official play and somebody that the world needs to know that you need to be picking this man up off of the waiver wire. And it's funny because it's really the theme of the day is all these veteran players that the CFF world had left for dead, right? When McGowan left New Mexico State to go to Kentucky, many assumed that this was a paycheck transfer, a place for him to go hang his final season, provide quality depth for an SEC team, maybe get into some facilities that, let him, work out well enough to work his way into the NFL potentially, right? But especially with, and then add on to that, right? You also had Kentucky bring in Dante Daddle, a running back from Nebraska. They also returned Jason Patterson. Few of us even really gave McGowan a chance to be even a part, or even give him a possibility to be atop this depth chart. And well, we were very, very wrong. And it's not McGowan's been very consistent in his volume in each of his games for the Wildcats. This isn't even one of those things like Sutton Smith where he's kind of building up his volume week to week and they just keep giving him more carries because he's earned them. No, he started this season with a decent number of carries. He had 17 carries in week 1, 15 in week 2, 18 in week 3. He hasn't had a game so far with less than 75 yards and a touchdown. It's good to see that he's done this against a variety of competition, right? That includes 2 cupcake matchups against MAC teams, but also a very legitimate opponent in Ole Miss, right? That tells me the volume's going to be there no matter what kind of competition they are facing. And to me, as long as Kentucky remains competitive in their matchups, McGowan will be heavily involved. The one thing I do worry about with McGowan, though, is that he hasn't shown to be really an option in the receiving game. He's third in the team when it comes to pass snaps. So he's an option out there, but he's only been targeted on 5 of those snaps so far, which is a very low, rate of target to snaps, right? So this makes me kind of worry that he could get game scripted out. And that wouldn't really be such a big deal, but Kentucky's upcoming schedule is number 5, Georgia, number 8, Texas, number 15, Tennessee, number 22, Auburn. They faced South Carolina before that, who was just ranked. Granted, they'll be without Lenore Sellers most likely in that game. But even so, that's just a brutal upcoming schedule. And again, if McGowan doesn't show an ability to work out of the backfield a whole lot more, I am very legitimately concerned that he could get game scripted out a lot in the upcoming schedules. But for right now, just given his consistent volume, I think you got to go after him. Next running back here, I fully admit, like the first 3 running backs, I feel really good about. The next ones afterwards, it feels like it takes a little bit of a dip here. But we're still obviously going to discuss them. But we'll start with K'Jon Owens, the running back out of Florida International. New staff coming here over from Florida A&M. No real indication that they were ones to have like a workhorse back, but Owens very much kind of following the Sutton Smith route of earning more touches as the season's going on right now. Against Bethune-Cookman in week 1, he had 11 touches for 71 yards and 2 touchdowns in that game. Against Penn State, a very impressive 15 rush attempts for 78 yards. Didn't find the end zone in that game, right? But still, the fact that he was able to consistently rip off 5 yards a rush against Penn State's defense, very good sign that Owens can continue to produce down the stretch. And that's exactly what happened against Florida Atlantic this past weekend. 19 carries, 173 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Also had 3 catches for 19 yards as well. This just screams that Florida International is going to slowly but surely turn Owens into a potential workhorse moving forward. It helps a lot that FIU schedule is phenomenal, right? Like they've already got their Penn State matchup out of the way. From here on out, it's mostly G5, and even better than G5, just CUSA matchups as far as the eye can see. They got UConn. It's very, very favorable down the stretch for Owens, and so again, there's a possibility that things regress, and I can look up their stuff real quick, and should have had this down, but CUSA. I'm looking at the Sun Belt. Yeah, actually, no. I like looking at the rest of it. Like again, Owens is just. I was about to say like I'm a little concerned they could slowly move him back to committee, but like he's not workhorse in terms of like he's not getting 60% of the touches, but he's getting like they're running the ball so much that he doesn't need to have a huge volume, or he doesn't need to have a huge rushing share in order to get the 15 to 20 touches there. And he's clearly the best back in that backfield right now. Again, 300 yards already through 3 games here. The next closest running back has 90 yards through 3 games. So it's like I feel pretty good about Owens continuing to be pretty consistent down the line. Again, I just hope that they don't regress into a committee at any given point, but we shall see. Last running back I want to discuss here is Joe Nathan Silver, the running back out of Delaware, a guy that was pretty high on before the season, and a guy that I will fully admit I gave up on way too early. At least in leagues that I had him, and he was droppable because I got scared so much by that week 1 game against Delaware State where he only had 6 rushing attempts, 34 yards, 4 catches, 21 yards, and I just sat there and I'm like, oh my god, like they're gonna go full committee with this. They're not even gonna get him enough carries, even if he's highly efficient, to have some big games and everything like that. The following week against Colorado, again, it was against Colorado, so I can't write too much away from it. But 11 carries, 47 yards. 4 catches, 12 yards, and a touchdown through the air, but still, like, wasn't anything that I was super excited about. But here we go, against UConn in an absolute thriller of a game between Delaware and UConn there. Silver, 15 attempts, 179 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Silver was very, very close to being a guy that I threw onto my waiver wire traps, because this feels like the profile of a waiver wire trap, usually for me, right? Like, a guy that goes from 6 carries, 11 carries, or 10 carries or 10 touches, 15 touches, all of a sudden now ripping off 12 yards a carry, 2 touchdowns and stuff like that, right? Like that feels like somebody I would point at and be like, don't fall for it. The reason why I'm legitimately making this a play is because, one, I do trust this Delaware running game quite a bit. And what I can tell you is over the last couple of years, even though Silver's probably never going to get the volume that I really want to see, like he's not going to get to, the 20 plus touches a game or anything like that. Delaware has shown the last couple of years, they don't need volume. They just need efficient runners to have really good fantasy production, right? Marcus Yarns, 2 years ago, 136 carries, 937 yards, 15 touchdowns. The year after that, Marcus Yarns In 9 games, 133 attempts, 6 touchdowns. And he had 844 yards that year. Their running backs consistently over the last couple of years have ran over 6 yards a carry. At least they're number one guys. And Joe Nathan Silver, no exception. Behind Marcus Yarns last year, Silver was sitting there running over 6.5 yards per attempt. And so far this season, that is exactly what we are seeing with Silver. In fact, right now he's up to 8.1 yards per attempt. Now, again, you can sit there and tell me like, oh, well, I mean, he's only faced Delaware State, Colorado, and UConn, right? Like, how much can we really buy into that? Again, Delaware's playing CUSA's schedule here. And if I open up the full schedule here in just a second, I don't think they have any more worrisome matchups. Yeah, no. FIU, Western Kentucky, Jacksonville State, MTSU, Liberty, Louisiana Tech, Sam Houston, Wake Forest, UTEP. Outside of maybe the Wake Forest game, which again they showed already that they're happy to let teams score on them. Like I don't see it. I don't see a matchup there that I wouldn't feel comfortable throwing Silver in and just thinking, okay, if he gets 15 touches, he's golden in this matchup. So I'm going to put out Silver there as an official play at running back. In terms of honorable mentions, I'll throw out some guys here. Again, all of these guys have major questions, or at least had really bad performances this last week, so forgive me a little bit. But Tay Meadows, running back there out of Troy, he only had just a really weird game. He had 5 rush attempts, 7 yards, so already abysmal on that front. But again, him stopping at 5 rush attempts after getting 23 and 16 the weeks before, I couldn't find anything on an injury, but I highly suspect that there was at least something there. Mekhi Frazier definitely was injured in his game against Youngstown State there, but even still found a way into the end zone, although, less than 2 yards of carry definitely was not ideal for that matchup. But keep an eye on his injury there, but I still think down the line he'll be pretty solid for Michigan State. Bill Davis, absolute stinker against Mizzou, but we kind of already understood that. They took him out of the game pretty early on because I think they knew that they were going to need to rely on him down the stretch. He only had 6 carries in the game against Mizzou. I think once they realized that he's getting hit behind the line of scrimmage all the time, take him out, save him for the Sun Belt matchups, and just go from there. I think Bill Davis will be fine the rest of the way. Lucky Sutton, still available on 33% of leagues, so I'm just here to remind you all that if he's still available in your league, you got to go grab him. And then Dominic Richardson, not a great performance this past week against Navy. 13 rush attempts, 61 yards, and a touchdown. But even so, just based on what we've seen so far with Tulsa, he's their main back. In other matchups, we should see him be used a lot more, especially when they're not trailing, 42-23 late in the game. So that's running backs. Good Lord, I still got wide receivers to get to, and we're already an hour in. I got to really be faster at these things at one point. Haha, JK, I won't be doing that. I am far too long-winded for that. Anyway, wide receivers. Like I said at the start of the show, this is still the deepest place to go grab off the waiver wire. I think it pretty much is every single year because wide receivers are already one of the higher variance positions, but we do have some legitimate guys this year, I think, that could end up being I don't want to throw league winner out there because it is like a very loaded term, obviously, but these guys have the potential to end up being, or some of these guys have potential to end up being like top 15 wide receivers for CFF if they continue to do what they have been doing. And the first one up here is Chris Brazzell, wide receiver out of Tennessee, rostered on 26% of leagues. During and after the game against Georgia, commentators made many comparisons of Chris Brazzell's performance against Georgia on Saturday to Jalen Hyatt's near single-handed destruction of Alabama in 2022. And I'll be real, that's far from an unfair comparison. Like, Brazzell saw 8 targets in this game, resulted in 6 receptions, 177 yards, and 3 touchdowns. And those 3 touchdowns included several insane acrobatic plays over some very talented Georgia DBs. The thing that really stuck out to me, though, is that this isn't new for Brazzell this season, right? Like, this isn't him just having this major breakout game, and now we got to wonder, is this sustainable? In the 2 games before, Brazzell saw 19 targets for 187 yards and 2 touchdowns. The problem is, like, we in the CFF world did not know if we could fully trust that because, like I said with Aguilar, the last couple of years, we had seen the Tennessee offense start the season really, really good, only for them to fizzle out in SEC play. But, like I said, much like Aguilar, Brazzell is now showing that he can be a force no matter who he is playing against this year, especially with his best performance coming against what could be the best defense he plays in the regular season. Now, I will say some of you might be wondering why I'm discussing Brazzell over his teammate Braylon Staley, who also has had a pretty good start to the season and actually has seen more targets than Brazzell. First, what I will say to that is that Staley, also a pretty good pickup, especially in PPR leagues. I think he is great for that. However, I still think Brazzell is the prize here. I think he strikes me as the higher ceiling play just because, his volume isn't that much lower than Staley, and the value of his targets has just been so much higher. Like, Staley's average depth of target has been 8.3. Meanwhile, Brazzell's is a team high of 14.3. He is their deep threat option. And this has led to the discrepancy between Staley and Brazzell when it comes to their efficiency. Like, Brazzell averages almost 5 yards more per catch than Staley does, and that adds up over time in a big way, right? Like, and in addition, like, because of his role, because of this deep threat role that Brazzell has, he is far more likely to find the end zone as he just, runs past the defense for a quick strike score versus Staley, with him being the slot wide receiver, unless they're sending him on, like, deep slot fades or something like that, he is reliant more on more sustained drives, which Tennessee isn't quite nearly as good at. Their whole bread and butter is, sustained drives through the running game mostly, not really through the receiving game, and then quick strikes through the passing game, which is where Brazzell is obviously more attuned to take advantage of. So Brazzell is fantastic. Again, flashbacks of Jalen Hyatt are real. Could very well end up being a similar thing if this offense continues to be great in SEC play. So, speaking of SEC wide receivers, we got another one here in Harrison Wallace, another wide receiver right at the marker there, rostered at 28%. Probably won't be available in most leagues come after this week. Part of CFF is admitting when you get a room wrong, and for the upteenth time, it feels like this season, it looks like we got to do so again with Ole Miss wide receiver room. Throughout the offseason, folks like me as well, pinned Dejon Stribling as the heir apparent to Trey Harris and many other wide receivers Ole Miss has produced over the years. And, why not? Like, Stribling was hyper efficient like Harris was. He had played and produced at an appropriate level of competition beforehand. He had some hype this offseason. But a lot of us really had tunnel vision on Stribling there, and that in combination with, Wallace having the stink of being a former Penn State wide receiver, it really did make us forget about Wallace being brought in this offseason and being a legitimate option for this passing game. And while Wallace so far nowhere close to the absolute beast that Trey Harris was last year, Wallace has clearly established himself as the favorite target for the Rebels early on in the season. He leads the team with 26 targets, the next closest being Caden Lee and Deuce Alexander with 12 apiece. Wallace has been hyper efficient so far, averaging an elite 22.6 yards per catch. His average depth of target is 15.6. What's even more impressive is that Wallace has done this without the help of cupcake games, right? Like, he's had two of his performances come against Arkansas and Kentucky. Two teams which aren't like the cream of the crop when it comes to SEC defenses, but they are legitimate competition, right? He averaged 16 fantasy points in those games in half PPR formats. His baseline production has just been fantastic. His lowest game yardage wise so far is 92 yards. And if he can ever get a game where he can put together more than one touchdown on the board, it is lights out for those of you playing against him in fantasy. So I would say if he's still available, grab him in your league before somebody else does. Next guy we'll talk about here is Zion Booker, a guy that I really kind of like for PPR leagues moving forward. Again, he plays on Tulsa, a team that I'm still trying to figure out exactly how I view this offense. But what I can't deny is the fact that Booker is very, very clearly a target monster in this system. Fantrax has it where he has not had a game lower than 9 targets. He has had 22 receptions to this point in the season. His efficiency definitely leaves something to be desired. He's only, looking at about 9.3 yards per catch. That's why I said he's very much more of a PPR option. He's only found the end zone once this year. Again, hopefully that increases, but, Tulsa's whole deal so far this year hasn't really been scoring through the passing game. I think they've only had 4 passing touchdowns total to this point, and a lot of it has come on the ground otherwise. And so maybe that gets turned around at some point, but definitely kind of caps the ceiling of Booker. But in terms of PPR, again, you're looking at 8 receptions, 6 receptions, a very nice floor every single week. Add on some production on top of it. I like Booker moving forward, especially if this offense can get better and better as it goes along. They're playing in the American, a conference with, where defense is a option. There's plenty of shootout potential there. So I think Booker is an extremely nice pickup here. It also helps that, again, he's not really battling other people for targets. He's got Mekhi Miller there, but Mekhi Miller's had 12 less targets in 3 games. Micah T's, half the targets that Booker is seeing. So again, like I said, very much, in my opinion, a PPR option. For those of you who are looking for that out there. And again, his schedule, pretty nice in the next couple of weeks. Oklahoma State, I don't think anybody's scared of them. And then you got Tulane, Memphis, American Conference games the rest of the way. Next wide receiver we'll discuss here is Kyrie Duplessis. This is a guy that I actually discussed early on. I think week 1, I had him listed as a honorable mention in the long list of waiver wire options for wide receivers in week 1. And here we are, a couple weeks later, still rostered at, just about 2%, and he's looking good. Again, this past week against UConn, 11 targets, 9 catches, 161 yards, and a touchdown. It's always hard to know really what to expect from a team, coming up from the FCS to the FBS. We can try to look at what they've done in the past, but, with the increased level of competition, there's a lot of things that could really change, right? Like, you're not able to run the ball as easily as you used to, right? Like, maybe in the past you are able to spread the ball around just a little bit more because you have defenses not able to keep up with your wide receivers as much. But that's exactly it. That's exactly what I think is happening here, right? One thing that I do think is changing for Delaware from FCS to FBS is they are becoming a little bit more reliant on their top end wide receivers, right? Like, normally this staff is pretty content to spread the ball around. At least they were at the FCS level. Their top wide receiver usually finishing the season around 70, 75 targets. However, through 3 games so far, Duplessis is on pace for 96 targets in 12 games, and he could finish with an even higher target total as the season goes along, especially if you just look at what he's done against, comparable competition, right? Like, he's been very impressive the first couple of games here for the Blue Hens. He's averaged 15.5 yards a catch, he's already seen 2 90-yard games, including a 161-yard performance against UConn this past week, like I said. He did lay an egg against Colorado, but, a lot of G5 teams do, so I'm not going to be holding that against him. If his games against Delaware State and UConn are anything to go by, like, Duplessis could be a huge boon in CUSA games. Like, in those 2 matchups, Duplessis averaged 10 targets, 8 catches, 125 yards. Like, if that's what you can give me as an average down the stretch, that'd be crazy. Like, again, obviously it's let me be very clear. Obviously a very small sample size, but just the thought of that even being within his range of outcomes the rest of the way, to me, makes him a very nice target off the waiver wire this week. And like I said, so far, Delaware's kind of shown they can avoid the pitfalls so far that a lot of FCS teams have shown in their first year at this level of competition. So hopefully that continues so Duplessis can eat. The main thing that I'm somewhat worried about is the return of Jake Thaw from injury. There was really no word on when that might be. But even when Thaw does return, like we already saw against Delaware State, that both of them can eat in this offense at the same time. It just probably caps Duplessis' ceiling just a little bit. So, last wide receiver I want to discuss here is Raphael Williams, wide receiver out of Pitt, rostered on 4% of leagues so far this year. Another wide receiver room that surprisingly, it just seems like that we're going to whiff on here, but I'm not going to blame the CFF community whatsoever on this one because we were just targeting the guy that led, double check with this before I say this. Nope, no, he didn't actually. Oh, we're just being dumb. Anyway, again, we were all going after Kenny Johnson. And it seems like that might have just been a really dumb move because Raphael Williams out-targeted Kenny Johnson last year. Stayed with Konate Mumfield. Again, he didn't have a great receiving percentage, right? But, he was looking pretty good. Gotta say. Yeah, I'm just feeling dumbfounded now. I completely forgot to look at what Kenny Johnson did last year. And that's the guy we were all drafting, and he's not doing super hot to start this year. He wasn't really super hot last year. He finished the season with 537 yards, 3 touchdowns. Meanwhile, I guess he outproduced Raphael Williams just because of he had more receptions, but even still. None of this takes away from the fact that Raphael Williams is definitely the guy to own for Pittsburgh going forward right now. Like 2 games in a row here after, week 1 against Duquesne where, Williams only had 2 targets, 1 catch, 45 yards, and, you move on from there. Williams has been phenomenal the last couple of weeks. 9 targets in each of his games, 6 catches in each of his games, averages 120 yards in each of those games, 3 touchdowns between those 2 games. Like, just on fire last couple of weeks. Very much a leading receiver now for Pittsburgh. The deep threat option, averaging 20 yards per catch through 3 games. Again, very small sample size, but very much showing a big improvement from last year. Eli Holstein staying healthy will definitely help him out quite a bit. But yeah, it's hard to ignore a guy that's throwing up 200-yard games in a row here. So yeah, go grab Raphael Williams and drop whatever Kenny Johnson shares you might still have because he's kind of cooked if Raphael Williams is still going to keep doing this. So, all right, at wide receiver, when it comes to honorable mentions, I'll just run through the names again here real quick. Brendan Thompson, Anthony Evans. Again, they're funneling a ton of targets to those guys at Mississippi State. Go pick them up. Justice Ross Simmons only had 1 target this past weekend, 26 yards and a touchdown. It's Syracuse playing toothpaste. I'm not worried about it. Jaden Barnes continues to just improve week after week. His best performance last week, 14 targets, 10 catches, 132 yards and a touchdown. A must-own in leagues right now. The 2 UAB wide receivers, very similar to Mississippi State. Like the offense just funnels targets to these guys. They got a tough matchup against Tennessee this week, so I wouldn't pick them up for immediate production, but just consistent production like week after week here from both of those guys. And then last but not least, Jaquan Gibson, wide receiver out of UMass, rostered 19% of leagues. PPR only leagues, in my opinion, for Gibson there because UMass, I don't trust them to score a whole ton, even though they are going to play a lot more MAC teams this year, which should definitely help their offense. But Gibson's a pure volume play, and he's a pure PPR play. Again, you're talking about 19 targets, 11 targets, 10 targets, 12 receptions, 7 receptions, 5 receptions. Like, he hasn't found the end zone once this season, but he catches enough balls that they basically count as another touchdown. So I would go after Gibson in any kind of PPR format. Last but not least, let's discuss Eli Raridan, the tight end out of Notre Dame, one of 3 tight ends that we'll be discussing today. And, tale as old as time, song as old as rhyme, Notre Dame and the tight end. With the loss of Mitchell Evans, there was, doubts among the CFF community that Eli Raridan would be that guy to take over the role left behind because Raridan, at least up until this point in his career, was almost exclusively used as a blocker behind Evans, right? Like, if there's going to be a receiving tight end to be had this year with the Irish, a lot of us, myself included, were kind of taking a look at maybe one of the younger guys would take a really big step. Fools we were. Raridan has put to bed any thought of him not being the top tight end option for Notre Dame this year. Through 2 games against very good competition, Raridan has looked great. He's seen 13 targets for 9 receptions, 182 yards, which is fantastic production at the tight end position. He might already be on his way. It feels like at this point, unless he gets hurt, that 600 yards on the season is just a lock, right? Because he's already at such a safe floor with 182 yards there. He hasn't found the end zone yet, but like I said with other guys, like given how much volume has come his way and how much Notre Dame's defense might force him to score this year, that's an issue for them this year. The issue of no touchdowns so far, I think, will resolve itself sooner rather than later. There's lots of tight ends that have kind of popped up early on as potential really steady options down the stretch, but very few of them have like the historic / system backing that Raritan does. And so I think he's a great add for those who are still kind of looking for their ride or die tight end option this year. Very much a guy that I personally will be targeting this week in any league that I'm still struggling at the tight end position. So next tight end, though, that I will throw up here is Mr. Hunter Andrews, another guy that, again, I admittedly kind of left for dead after week 1 because Utah played UCLA, and Hunter Andrews had a singular rushing attempt for 25 yards. And, yeah, I was like, okay, so Hunter Andrews not as big a part of this offense as I thought he was going to be. Then he had a little bit more work against, Cal Poly here, 3 targets, 3 receptions, 19 yards. He had 5 rushing attempts on the ground, 21 yards. But I thought to myself, I'm like, oh, okay, that was a blowout, right? Like they're going to get him more involved. But then this past week against Wyoming, 5 targets, 5 receptions, 44 yards. He also had 6 rushing attempts, 62 yards, and a touchdown. Now, again, it's another blowout, but it was also a blowout that didn't really start until the second half there. And it seems pretty clear going forward that Hunter Andrews is one of the rare tight ends that, again, he's kind of playing out of position. They're mostly using him as a running back, but also receiving options. He's very much a gadgety player for Utah right now. And so if you can give me a tight end that can see, 3 to 5 targets through the air, but also, 3 to 6 carries on the ground, especially with how efficient he's been. Like, again, they use him in gadgety roles, so his plays tend to be, plays that bust open a few more yards than your typical running back and stuff like that. So I'm willing to take the shot on that, especially in deeper leagues, just as the potential cheat code there. And again, God forbid, if Parker or Rogers goes down, Hunter's has got a huge ceiling if he becomes just even the number 2 back in this system. All right, last tight end I want to discuss here is a guy that I think is off the radar of a lot of people. I mean, considering that he's 1% rostered, I would have to assume so. But like Raritan, he is a guy that hasn't scored a touchdown yet, but we like this offense, clearly. I'm talking about Isaiah Cummings, the tight end out of Appalachian State. I did not realize just how productive this man was being. Again, he just hasn't found the end zone. The week 1 against Charlotte, 6 targets, 5 receptions, 57 yards. Week 2 against an FCS opponent there in Lindenwood, 4 targets, 4 receptions, 33 yards. This past week against Southern Miss, 9 targets, 7 receptions, 82 yards. Again, he hasn't found the touchdown, but when you give me a guy that has 19 targets in 3 games at the tight end position, that's a dude that's going to find the end zone eventually, right? He can find 4 touchdowns throughout the rest of this year, especially in PPR leagues. Like, if he can keep up with this consistent volume throughout the stretch, like down the stretch, Cummings very much a sleeper option right now. Again, he's on bye this week, so we won't get answers this week. But then he's got, Boise State, Oregon State the week afterwards. Like, we'll get some more we'll get some more eyeballs on him, and hopefully he can start finding the end zone a little bit in those games. And then honorable mentions, I'll throw out the 3 guys I had last week. Again, Dan Villari, Jeremiah Franklin, Jaron Canuck. All of them had decent games this past weekend. All of them, I think, are going to continue to be very steady options at the tight end position moving forward. All right. With that, we come to the end of our show. Again, I appreciate you guys bearing with me. Again, I'm a little bit tired. I'm also, if you can't tell, my voice is a little shot this week compared to other weeks. Again, I've been trying to drink a little bit of water, but it has been tough. But anyways, I'm sure you guys don't mind at all. And I thank you guys for listening. I thank you again for bearing with me. And if you have not already, make sure you leave a like, a comment, and subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube. And if you're on the podcast side of things, make sure you follow the show, leave a 5-star review wherever you can. Make sure you guys check out the rest of the Campus of Canton Podcast Network for shows ranging on pretty much anything you can think of related to the college fantasy game. We'll see you guys back here on Tuesday night. Again, we got our Start Sit live stream there at 8 p.m. sharp. Again, make sure you guys are there. You can show up a little bit early, start putting questions in the chat. Always appreciate that. Until then, really appreciate you guys, and I hope you guys have a wonderful and blessed week. See y'all.